We're ready to start. Thank you so much for everybody being here. Nice to see all your smiling eyes under these masks. Welcome to the Wilhelmina Jenkins CFS Service Awards. My name is Nathan Lee. I'll be hosting. Whether you're joining us in person or one of the attendees online, many people with CFS or Healthy Allies, we're proud to have you here among us. Tonight, we honor Wilhelmina Jenkins, a local woman who has fought with CFS for over 40 years. She's been fighting for better medical care, more education and research, and we also honor two Georgians who are following in her footsteps, Ryan Pryor and Dr. Tiffany Walker. You're going to hear about the impact their service has had on people with CFS. We'll also have a panel discussion where you're going to hear about what you can do to help. At the conclusion of tonight's ceremony, we will light candles in honor of those we've lost, and also as an expression of hope that working together we can conquer CFS. As the husband of someone living with CFS, I cannot tell you how overwhelming it is to see everyone and all the support. So often being a part of the CFS community means being alone and fighting for help, fighting to be heard and be believed. But while we each weather our own battles, we're also part of a larger collaborative effort. We are proof of what happens when we find each other, unite our experiences and our voices, and gradually turn ripples into waves. Together we are a force for change, a reason to celebrate and to hope. For those of you less familiar with CFS, a quick summary. CFS stands for Myalgic Encephalomyelitis, or chronic fatigue syndrome. You may hear it referred to as CFS or just ME. It's an immune condition that researchers estimate affects 5 to 9 million Americans. CFS symptoms occur in every system of the body, but the hallmark system is post-exertional malaise, which manifests across all systems in the body. PEM, as it's called, is the cruel backlash for any exertion at all, physical, mental, emotional. It strikes after the fact, can last days, weeks, months, years. I've heard it described as having the worst flu you've ever had. Attach heavy weights to every part of your body, turn the volume up to 11, and turn your brain into a pincushion. For people with CFS, PEM is the world's minimum cost of admission, and every crash comes with the terror that this might be the one that lasts. CFS is now 5 to 9 times more common than multiple sclerosis, but receives 1/20th of the research funding. So, some stats here. CFS patients have a greater disease burden than almost any other illness, including cancer and AIDS. 75% of patients are unable to work, even part-time, and most have been denied disability. 25% of patients are entirely bedbound. 80 to 90% of patients are undiagnosed. There are currently only 19 CFS specialists in the entire United States, and none in Georgia. Many doctors have never even heard of CFS. There are no FDA-approved treatments, and there is no cure. Only 5% of patients experience remission or recovery. The other 95% will remain sick for the rest of their lives. For decades, if not centuries, people with CFS have fought an endless war against stigma and misinformation. We are finally starting to see the seeds of real change. Congress is taking notice, research is being recognized. The media is finally talking about what the CFS community has been shouting from the rooftops for so long. CFS needs to be solved now. In the past 4 years, CFS cases in the U.S. are estimated to have doubled or perhaps tripled. Up to 50% of long COVID patients meet the diagnostic criteria for CFS. People who have lived with this disease for decades saw it coming and tried to warn others, but did not have enough power on their own to stop it. When the first wave of COVID long haulers began to appear, they shared the strength and experience of the patient community, the researchers and the journalists who have been here before. This community has shown up with answers when the experts and officials turn to have none. You, the people in this room, are the people and watching online, are the people who have paved the way forward and who give our family hope for a healthier future. You are the heroes we celebrate tonight. The history of MECFS is bleak, but heroes are not formed without adversity. Whether you are a patient, doctor, policymaker, journalist, advocate, or ally, you are the reason our past does not have to be the future. And we aren't starting from scratch. There are decades of research, underfunded and underutilized, but passionate and hopeful research. There's also the lived experience of millions of people with ME who have sounded the alarm for decades. By combining the research with lived experience, we can hope for better care. The infection-associated chronic illnesses we are seeing in long COVID are not new. People with MECFS have been here before, and now people are sitting up, taking notice, and taking action. I know there are days when it feels hopeless, when the challenges seem insurmountable, but take a moment right now to look around you and see the resilience, determination, and the personification of hope. Memorize the feeling of being one of a pantheon of heroes and know in your soul that while millions are missing, they are not invisible or forgotten, and we will continue to rise. Thank you. And now we'll have the distinct honor to hear from Camila Conrad, daughter of Wilhelmina Jenkins, who this ceremony is named after. Ladies and gentlemen, Camila Conrad.
Good evening. My name is Camila Conrad, and I'm honored to share with you the story of my mother's dedicated of service to the MECFS community. My mother, Wilhelmina Jenkins, became ill with MECFS in February 1983 at the age of 33. At that time, she was working to finish her PhD in physics at Howard University. She was part of a research group at what is now the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and she was teaching physics at both Howard University and the District of Columbia. During this busy but exciting time, and with no identifiable trigger, her health took an abrupt turn. She suddenly developed a wide variety of devastating symptoms, including fatigue, muscle pain, poor exercise tolerance, neurologic symptoms such as headaches and problem with memory. Most painfully, she could no longer understand physics or math, subjects she had loved throughout her life. Her own calculations, made only a few weeks earlier, were suddenly incomprehensible. She was terrified. She continued to work and push herself, raising 2 children and trying to pursue her love of teaching, but she was too sick. By 1987, she had pushed her body and brain so hard that they gave out completely. After a grueling move to Atlanta, where my father had been granted a faculty position, she became bedbound. By 1988, she had suffered for 5 years with an illness that seemingly had no name. Finally, a psychiatrist suggested that she might have what we now call MECFS. She was referred to an infectious diseases specialist who confirmed her diagnosis and helped treat some of her symptoms. Crucially, this doctor connected her with an Atlanta support group for MECFS. Attending the support group was a revelation. She met people whose stories were very much like her own. In addition to hearing others describe their cognitive dysfunction, she heard for the first time people describing the delayed, disproportionate crash that comes after exertion, that is now known as post-exertional malaise. In the 1990s, at least a half dozen support groups popped up around the Metro Atlanta area, providing hope and community to a growing population of people with MECFS and fibromyalgia. These groups offered people a place where they could network and organize, and importantly, feel validated. My mother embraced this community, and as she learned more about the lack of urgency on the part of government agencies and research and education about her illness, she became an advocate. Her symptoms moderated just enough that she was able to speak out about her lived experience. And wow, did she speak out. She spoke whenever she had the opportunity at events hosted by the NIH and CDC. She was interviewed for a local Atlanta radio talk show and a religious TV show. She appeared numerous times in CNN and at a briefing for members of Congress. Together, she and I appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show to talk about our experience as a mother and daughter with MECFS. As an African-American woman, my mother was deeply disturbed by the reluctance of government agencies to reach out to the African-American community, especially since MECFS had been misrepresented in the media as a disease that did not affect black people. She hoped that by being visible in any way she could, she would reach those in the African-American community who were not correctly being diagnosed with MECFS. Her advocacy work had to be balanced with a decades-long struggle to regain as much functioning as possible, being careful to pace her activities, to avoid a flare of her symptoms, and to learn to live with a very narrow energy envelope. She served on the board of the organization now known as SOLVE-ME. She built relationships spanning over years and found a strong ally with the late Congressman John Lewis and his staff. In September of 2016, a core group of ME advocates gathered at the Georgia State Capitol for an awareness rally. My mother spoke that day and talked about her decades of living with ME. It was a pivotal moment. Many who heard my mom speak that day decided to do the work and organize. Together, we've become the MEAction Georgia community that thrives today. The goal was to work until every person living with MECFS had access to an effective treatment. In 2021, my mother was featured in a Time magazine report about Black women and their fight to be recognized as long COVID patients. She helped new long COVID patients, their doctors, and the general public understand how research and strategies used at MECFS could help reduce suffering in long COVID. A short time later, my mother wrote an in-depth patient perspective, published in Up to Date, giving clinicians first-person insight into the experiences of those living with ME. It was perhaps the pinnacle of her decades of advocacy. Shortly after writing that patient perspective, my mother's health took a frightening turn as she experienced a severe post-exertional malaise crash. She crawled into bed in January of 2022 and did not get back up. She spent the last 2.5 years bedridden. When tonight's service awards were conceived, there was no doubt that they would be named in her honor. Despite decades of disabling symptoms, my mom, who's affectionately known as Mina, is the cornerstone of the MEAction Georgia community. She provides a link between the history of MECFS and today's long COVID. And she never let us lose sight of the disproportionate burden of ME on medical marginalized groups and people of color. This is who she is. She leads with empathy and kindness. She inspires others to step up. I want to conclude with her own words. If I could speak to every newly diagnosed person, the first thing that I would say to them is that this is not your fault. This is a life-crushing disease, but you did not cause it. There are good researchers out there working hard to understand this poorly understood disease. And as long as they are doing the work, there is hope. Be very gentle with yourself. Be as kind to yourself as you would be to your closest friends if something this devastating happened to them. And remember that your life has value, no matter how constrained it may be. Try your absolute best to hold on. That's what she's doing now. That's what every person with ME is doing. We're holding on. Thank you, Mom, for helping us to all hold on.
Wilhelmina, I believe you're watching tonight. We are so grateful for you. Camila, we're so grateful for you for sharing her story. Thank you for being here. And now it's time for the service awards, and we'll hear from Jess Gordon.
All right.
Big font and I still need glasses. I'm Jess Gordon and I am a person living with ME and a really, really grateful member of MEAction Georgia.
Tilt the mic towards your mouth a little bit.
Like that? Is that better? Okay. Thank you, Court. So first award we're going to present is to Ryan Pryor, a Georgia native who has made his mission to educate the public and our government about MECFS. Ryan's most recently served as a journalist in residence at the think tank The Century Foundation and writes the Patient Revolution column for the Psychology Today. He's an incoming Masters of Public Administration candidate at the Harvard Kennedy School. Classes are talking, sorry. When we dreamed up these awards, we wanted to recognize people who found novel ways to use their skills to help out the MECFS community. This year, Ryan did just that when he co-authored a white paper for Solve ME. The white paper outlines both the economic burden caused by infection-associated chronic conditions like MECFS and long COVID, and the lack of appropriate NIH funding to meet the needs of those who suffer, and also recommends possible policy solutions, and consequently was the primary tool used in last month's Solve ME Advocacy Week. Armed with Ryan's work, patients and allies met with members of Congress in one of the largest advocacy events in the MECFS community. This was hardly the first time Ryan's impressive writing taught people about MECFS. In 2022, Ryan wrote The Long Haul, Solving the Puzzles of the Pandemic Long Haulers and How They Are Changing Healthcare Forever. In this book, just released in paperback, there's some back there, Ryan weaves his own experience as an MECFS patient alongside stories of activists, long haulers, to reveal a recurring tale of people crying out for care. Exposing the overlap between long COVID and MECFS, as well as other infection-associated chronic conditions, he shows that the new epidemic of long COVID is not new at all. Rather, it is the most recent wave of patients facing a condition that is difficult to treat and neglected by science. In riveting and accessible prose, he elucidates the history of these conditions and shines a light on the people, both old and new, who are fighting for care and change from a medical system that has dismissed, gaslit, and marginalized them. Ryan is also the director of Forgotten Plague, a feature-length documentary about his own journey as an MECFS patient. The film explores the realities of living with these diseases, or this disease, and directly contradicts the stigmas and stereotypes that surround it. In 2015, the Huffington Post called the film a must-see, and we at MEAction Georgia wholeheartedly agree. Ryan went on to host screenings of his film to promote education for the medical students about MECFS and created the Blue Ribbon Foundation, or Blue Ribbon Fellowship, a paid internship for medical students to work with scientists at the forefront of MECFS research. Adding yet another dimension to his work, in 2017, Ryan and other advocates turned their attention to the Georgia State Legislature, where they successfully lobbied for the House Resolution 170, a bill dedicated to raising public awareness of MECFS and increasing research, clinical care, and medical education for this disease. All of Ryan's efforts shine a light on the experience of people with MECFS, the ways we are all trying to advocate for change, and the hope for improving both our healthcare system and patients' lives. He makes this invisible illness visible, and by doing so, he creates change. Thank you to Ryan for all that you have done and continue to do with people with MECFS. Thank you.
Just I'll make a few brief remarks here. That it's an honor to receive this award that's named for Wilhelmina, who has figure of grace who shows a lot of wisdom, and so she leaves big shoes to fill, and so it's really exciting to get this opportunity. I just want to thank some of my friends and family who are here, my parents who have played an incredible role in so many times when I've had periods of sickness, and have stood by me and been incredibly reliable, especially as I was writing this book in the last year and a half or so. I wrote most of it living in their basement, and so they were with me every step of the way through all of this. And a number of friends who are here, but in particular I want to thank Travis Preston, who is the editor of Forgotten Plague and went on to be a roommate for about 5 years, and so he's here, and I'm excited that he's been part of this journey with MEAction Georgia as well. And then also just want to recognize my co-director for Forgotten Plague, Nicole Castillo. She was planning to be here, but at the last minute she was not. She had some car trouble, but Nicole also played a really important role in helping to tell the story of Forgotten Plague, so I want to make sure that we recognize her efforts as well. But again, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Ryan. Now we'll hear from Corey Anderson-Swaney.
Good evening. My name is Corey, and I am also an MECFS patient. One of my symptoms is that my lungs are no longer strong enough for me to be able to breathe through a mask without having severe flares in the rest of my symptoms. So thank you to everyone here who is wearing a mask so that I can be here too. Our second awardee tonight is Dr. Tiffany Walker. Dr. Walker is an assistant professor of internal medicine at Emory University and co-founder of the Long COVID Clinic at Grady Memorial Hospital. She also serves as principal investigator or co-investigator for several Recover Initiative research studies and clinical trials. Her work both advances research into infection-associated chronic conditions and helps educate the public, Congress, and other medical professionals about these illnesses. We first heard about Dr. Walker in 2023 when she was awarded a $5 million grant to establish a multi-health system long COVID Center of Excellence, which allows Emory to expand their services and provide care to an underserved population. This achievement marked the next step in her efforts to improve medical care for people with infection-associated chronic conditions. She's presented a Solve ME webinar on the best ways for doctors to treat people with long COVID and ME/CFS, and is part of the Project Echo series of webinars for the same purpose. Currently, she is collaborating with MEAction on longer-term projects to improve medical education on this disease. Her efforts are a crucial antidote to the fact that ME/CFS is included in less than 1/3 of medical school curricula. In January of 2024, Dr. Walker expanded her education efforts beyond the medical field and testified before Congress at a Senate committee hearing. She was one of 4 experts called upon to address the long COVID crisis with a focus on advancing research and improving patient care. During that testimony, Dr. Walker emphasized the ME/CFS connection to long COVID, saying, quote, "There is mounting evidence supporting significant overlap between long COVID and pre-existing infection-associated chronic diseases, such as myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS, and dysautonomia, which are known to be debilitating and can persist in individuals indefinitely," end quote. No one understands that truth better than the people with ME/CFS who are gathered here today. Dr. Walker uses her expertise as a researcher to convince both Congress and medical professionals to learn about ME/CFS and change the way they treat this disease. For decades, Congress has ignored us and doctors have dismissed our needs. Dr. Walker is working effectively to create a world where ME/CFS is taken seriously both by our government and by medical science. Thank you, Dr. Walker, for all you have done and all you continue to do on behalf of people with ME/CFS.
Thank you so much, Corey, for that introduction. And I want to say thank you so much, Camila, for that really beautiful speech. And thank you to Wilhelmina for all the work that you've done. This is the type of award that is the most meaningful for people like me because it's coming from the people that I'm trying to help. It means so much more than an award I get through academics. You guys are the ones that we do this work for. I have to acknowledge the people that really brought MECFS to the forefront for me. I got involved in long COVID from the beginning, but it was when we incorporated patient advocates from MECFS World, Hannah Davis, Lisa McCorkle, and Jamie Seltzer from MEAction. They're the ones that taught me about MECFS more than any mentor or physician mentor that I had. And they're the reason why I'm really interested in this work and really want to make people better. And I want to acknowledge all of you because I know those of you in the audience who have MECFS are risking post-exertional malaise and a crash just being here. So I know that's a sacrifice just to honor us and to honor Wilhelmina, and I think that's really beautiful, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. Now we're going to have a little panel section. We'd like to invite Ryan and Dr. Walker back up on the stage, and we'll ask you some questions. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate both of your work and coming. Those of us who have been following MECFS research for several years know that there are a lot of exciting hypotheses being explored and discoveries being made. With the right people and resources, this disease could be solved within just a few years. First question for you, Ryan. What do you see as the main impediment to solving MECFS that we need to overcome right now before treatments and cures can be found?
The main impediment, as I see it, is largely about political will, and a lot of the work that's happened in the last few months on Capitol Hill, specifically in the U.S. Senate, and a really successful Senate hearing a few months ago, that really changed my perspective on how all this is going to work, because I've always viewed this not really as a scientific problem, it's really a political problem. I've been saying that for 10 years, and only in the last couple months have I really seen the political solution emerging. And then that's in the form of what's going to be called a long COVID moonshot. Will be a $10 billion initiative over 10 years, so $1 billion per year over the next decade. And with that amount of funding, then scientists can do the work that they need to do to solve the problem, and then ultimately that will get in the hands of doctors to treat patients who are dealing with it. And so one of the most important things that people can do today, even this week, is calling their local senators or representatives and telling them to support the long COVID moonshot. And if that legislation were to pass, if it gets through the appropriation cycle, and then it ultimately gets in the hands of researchers to do this work, that will be how we overcome the most important impediment.
And the moonshot is currently in the legislature or being considered right now?
Yes, so I've had some conversations with Senator Sanders' staff at the committee level, and they've got a proposal that has been released about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They are still in the drafting process. Ultimately, I expect that they'll release the bill, they'll introduce the bill, and they've got a number of different, so far mostly Democrat co-sponsors, and hopefully we get some Republican co-sponsors as well. So that bill may be ready in the next month or or so. I'm not quite sure what the timeline will be, but it's imminent, basically.
So a Clipper vote soon, you hope?
It may or may not go up for a vote directly. There's a more, slightly more arcane process of going through the appropriations and moving it through committee. And so it may be brought into a larger budget bill, so it would be a small piece of a $1 trillion bill, for instance, that covers a lot of other things. So exactly the process may get slightly in the weeds, but overall the specific measures of the legislation are close to being ready, and there's been a lot of really great advocacy of people who are influencing the specific measures that need to be in there. Even in the last week or so, there's been some new ideas added that I think are really effective.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great. Dr. Walker, in your role as a frontline clinician and educator, what do you see as the main impediment the healthcare system faces in getting appropriate care to people with ME/CFS that we need to overcome?
Yeah, I see two main issues. So the first one is clinician attitudes and practices around around ME/CFS. So understanding the disease, giving credence to the disease. And then the other issue is political, exactly as Ryan has mentioned, and having funding to be able to do the research for ME/CFS. The first issue, I think, is I think you guys have all experienced a physician that has either not known about ME/CFS or discounted your symptoms and said, I don't know what's going on, I think this might be in your head. And so what I recognize with that is I think physicians, they learn about all these diseases in medical school, and they come out even having learned about really esoteric diseases. And by the end of it, we have a feeling that we have a pretty good understanding of what diseases exist. And if we don't learn about ME/CFS in medical school, then it's not part of our illness scripts, right? And that's the term we use, illness scripts. So these symptoms fit this disease, these symptoms fit this disease. And so when we come to a patient that has symptoms that don't fit our illness script, we have a sense of, well, that can't be a disease because I know the diseases. And there's also a sense in physicians that want to help people, a sense of frustration. I don't know what this is, I don't know how to manage this, and the first thing I think is probably a defense mechanism is to kind of discount that. So I think what we really need to do is to not only improve education on ME/CFS amongst current physicians and upcoming physicians, so medical students, but I think we also need to target curricula that help physicians have a more plasticity when it comes to new diseases. So when something new emerges, or something that's always been there becomes apparent, the physician, instead of feeling kind of helpless or deciding, oh, it doesn't fit an illness script, we turn that into curiosity. Why doesn't that fit an illness script? And then using that and channeling that to learn more about that disease. I think that we really have to do that to get to the root of why you all are being dismissed with your symptoms of ME/CFS. And then on the policy side, this is something new to me as well, because I always think research, we just need to do the research, but we have to have the money to do the research, and it's becoming very clear to me that there is not appropriate allocation of funds to ME/CFS research. I think there is a little bit of a silver lining that long COVID happened. It's an awful disease. COVID is an awful disease. The one silver lining is we might be able, from the funding that goes towards COVID and long COVID, to learn more about ME/CFS and how we can treat it. That's a little beacon of hope for me. And I think that we really need to capitalize on this Moonshot Act. It's a long COVID bill, but we really tried to advocate when we met with Congress for this to be infection-associated chronic illnesses. And I was very pleased when I read it that that was the verbiage that they use, infection-associated chronic illnesses. We really need to have a center for infection-associated chronic illnesses, not just ME/CFS, long COVID, but dysautonomia and others, and have it housed under one center at the NIH, and that's really under the purview of Congress as well. And that way we'll be able to really allocate funds to that center and be sure that we're doing research for these diseases instead of it just being dispersed throughout different centers at NIH. So those are the two main things.
Great. Yeah, you talked about education for doctors to consider new illnesses like ME/CFS. what particular ways would they get that education? What's the mechanism for them to learn more?
Yeah, so the medical school curricula are set up pretty standard and rigid from the AAMC. And so what that would take would be to lobbying AAMC to get these curricula into the medical schools universally. So it would be easy for me to do lectures at my institution on this, but I'm interested in expanding beyond that and actually changing the curricula across the United States. And that's one of my interests and passions.
Thank you. A lot of times when we talk about MECFS, we focus on the suffering and what's going wrong, but medically it's a really fascinating disease, and solving its mysteries will have far-reaching effects in healthcare. And there's currently a ton of reason for optimism. So this question will be for both of you, slightly different. Dr. Walker, tell us a little bit about what drew you into MECFS advocacy and how you ended up testifying before Congress.
Sure. So I got involved in long COVID, as you all heard, and it was really through the projects I was working on in long COVID where we bring in patient advocates that have long COVID or overlap diseases like MECFS and dysautonomia, where I really learned a lot more about MECFS. And as I learned about post-exertional malaise and started really actually screening for that in my long COVID patients, I noticed that there was a substantial amount of post-exertional malaise, so I started screening for MECFS and found there was a substantial amount of MECFS. So at least in my patient population, we're probably more like 80% MECFS and long COVID. And we know that long COVID is probably about 10% of people that have COVID. So I'm really concerned about the actual incidence of MECFS after long COVID as well. And so that really motivates me, just seeing how suddenly disabled people are, being totally functional, being able to live a very healthy, happy life, and just on a dime, being so disabled from their symptoms. That's the part that I think really motivates me to work on this disease.
And Ryan, what about you? What motivated you to get involved with writing your book and the white paper about policies?
Yeah, so I'll start with writing the book. I was a science writer for CNN, and I was covering health features just in time. Right as the pandemic started, I was starting that new role. And so having been on the board of MEAction for the previous 5 or 6 years, my phone started ringing off the hook, emails, texts coming in, advocates from all over the country, scientists telling me that it was going to be really important to write about the long-term effects of this pandemic. Because we know that the things that we're talking about, these infection-associated chronic illnesses, they happen from almost any virus or any infection, famously from Lyme disease, which is a bacteria rather than a virus, also causes a lot of the same effects. So if you got millions of people all getting the same virus at the same time all over the world, then you were going to have the largest ever natural experiment to understand MECFS. So my role as a science writer for a large media platform was to do everything I could to tell that story. So I started pitching these stories within the first 1 or 2 months of the pandemic starting. And so when those stories start getting millions of page views, and you can see that these are at the front of the CNN.com homepage, it exhilarates you and you want to keep going and going. And I've been wanting to write a book for my entire life, and so I thought this was the moment where destiny hit, that this was the most important thing I could do for the world was to write this book. So in writing the book, over the next year or so, and it came out in 2022, I joined a think tank in Washington, the Century Foundation, and my boss was named Kim Dockstead. We had poached her from the White House. She was the disability director for President Biden, and she had been influential in writing Biden's first speech where he mentioned long COVID and rolled out a raft of new long COVID policies in an event in the Rose Garden. So it was an incredible privilege to get to work with her, creating more policy ideas at the Century Foundation. And so one of the things I learned is moving from being a journalist to becoming a policy wonk and writing papers that would help influence how legislation was built. I attended a conference at the National Academy of Medicine, where it was this, what I would consider a very historic event, creating a national research agenda for infection-associated chronic illnesses. And there I met people from the Federation of American Scientists, and they have a program called the Day One Project. And so the idea there is that if a new president takes office, you need to have a list of new policy ideas that they can enact on day one of their administration. So I wanted to write a memo for how to build a new office at the National Institutes of Health that unified all these different diseases with Gulf War syndrome, post-treatment Lyme disease, MECFS, long COVID. All of them there's different infections, but they all lead to the same place. Some people say that all roads lead to Rome. In this case, Rome is this really severe post-infectious state. So if you were to do research on all these same conditions in an office that was situated directly within the office of the NIH director, because they would then permeate across the 27 different institutes that make up the NIH, because these illnesses have symptoms that are in nearly every anatomical system. So one institute or one anatomical system isn't enough to fully comprehend the entire problem. And so it's been exciting to see these policy papers being directly translated into legislation. So Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts has a bill coming out in the next month or so also. And so we've been seeing that text. It's almost ready, and that'll be another really important way that and we'll be issuing some of the same calls to call your senators to support that legislation as well. And these two bills working in tandem, the long COVID moonshot and this new bill about a new office at NIH for infection-associated chronic illnesses, this is really an important moment in history that we can turn the tide and say that this is the moment when we really develop new understandings of human physiology, because this has always been the case that this happens after infections. So we know that we are also going to be living in a world where there's going to be more and more pandemics, unfortunately, because of globalization, because of a number of different technological forces. So in order to have a better sense of pandemic resilience for all future outbreaks around the world, we really have to have this office doing the right kind of research, because it will help so many people in the future as well.
Great, thank you. Dr. Walker, what about you? Current projects that you're working on in the MECFS space?
Yeah, so I have a number of colleagues that I work with on long COVID across the United States, providers that have been doing this for 4 years, and we're all starting to come together on the same theme that we really need to be expanding this to infection-associated chronic illnesses. So building these networks through that experience in long COVID, but building infection-associated chronic disease networks where we can expand our care beyond just long COVID. The main challenges have been the funding to be able to do this, but as Ryan mentions, I think it's really an exciting time with interest in creating a center at NIH and having funding for these infection-associated chronic illnesses. Trying to expand clinician knowledge and med student education, like I mentioned before, and doing those projects on infection-associated chronic illnesses into the curricula. And I'm really interested in clinical trials as well. I think we'll learn a lot about how folks who have MECFS from long COVID are responding to medications in these long COVID clinical trials, because many of them are designed not specifically for MECFS, but they will have categories within them that are people that have post-exertional malaise. And I know from my clinic, those people with post-exertional malaise are the patients that have MECFS, and I'll be very interested to see how these medications are working in this patient population, trying to find answers. So a couple different directions that I'm going with infection-associated chronic illnesses.
Yeah, I'm sure many people in the audience are following some of these research studies and the trials. Are there any specifically that you're excited about?
Yeah, so I've been trying to start a clinical trial myself using low-dose naltrexone. You guys are probably familiar with that. Just not enough data in that the use of low-dose naltrexone yet, but I know that it can be particularly beneficial in the patients that have MECFS, the brain fog, the fatigue, the pain syndromes. So hoping to be able to get that off the ground. Also, I think the recovered clinical trials, like I mentioned, they're targeted for long COVID, but the inclusion criteria have categories specifically for exercise intolerance and post-exertional malaise. So I'm really interested in antivirals. I think in the patients that have long COVID related MECFS, seeing how Paxlovid works. I'm particularly interested in that. I'm also interested, I've been working with a group called Every Cure, and they're using AI technology to be able to find medications that work in long COVID and infection-associated chronic illnesses based on the pathology, the way the medications work in the pathology of these diseases. And so some of the things that we're seeing in that are also antivirals, and not just those targeting COVID, but those that would target other viruses that might have caused MECFS long before long COVID. I think those are some of the ones that I'm the most interested in. And I also would say, if we do these trials and we find out that, say, for example, Paxlovid doesn't work, clinical trials are designed to be dichotomous, right? It works, it doesn't work. It doesn't mean it doesn't work if it doesn't work. It just means that the primary outcome wasn't met. And we may need to look at it in a different way. I just want to offer that as an insight as well. Because as we see these clinical trials and we treat for a certain period, we might find, hey, they're actually kind of doing well during a certain period, and maybe it drops off after the drug drops off, and we just need to treat longer. So keep that in mind as you're seeing some of the results of these studies coming out, that if we find that certain drugs don't work, it may mean that we need to look at it in a different way.
Thank you, that's a great reminder. They say, it takes a village, and it can't really be up to the MECFS patient community to solve the MECFS issue and get more funding and research and that kind of thing. Who are the people you'd like to see get more involved in the fight for solving ME?
I'll start with that one. And I do want to reiterate that these are really important ideas about using low-dose naltrexone as a safe drug that could easily be repurposed for MECFS, and the same with antivirals. And the idea of drug repurposing is incredibly important. And so just to flesh out this idea that you mentioned about Every Cure, this is a really important idea about using artificial intelligence for repurposed drugs. It takes more than a decade and more than $1 billion usually to introduce a new drug onto the market, and it's incredibly difficult to get FDA approval for these drugs. So if you use the thousands of drugs that have already been approved and use and cross-reference that with AI drug repurposing, or as Dr. David Feigenbaum, who started this group called Every Cure, he calls it drug cross-purposing. So testing every known disease against every known drug. And it is a profound new way to do science, and they have $50 million from ARPA-H, which is called the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. It's modeled after DARPA, which is the Pentagon's research arm that did some profound high-risk, high-reward research. That's the smartphone in your pocket, the GPS satellites that you use to get here are all products of DARPA that has had tremendous changes in the way that we live our lives because of this really important research. So applying a DARPA model to health, which is what ARPA-H does, is really important. And the drug repurposing that Dr. David Feigenbaum is doing is one of the really most promising projects that ARPA-H is doing. And I mentioned that there's been some really important new measures that have been added to this long COVID moonshot legislation, even in the past week. A few more senators, including Senator Tim Kaine, who was the vice presidential candidate in 2016, he has signed on to a letter saying that they need to give $200 million to ARPA-H. And I would contend that giving $200 million to ARPA-H is better than giving $1 billion to NIH, because it's an entirely new way of doing research. So those are the types of new people and new thinking that I think could really change ME. And one of the most important things about the way that ARPA-H is structured is that in order to get funding from them, you need to be able to prove that your ideas are going to be practical and useful in 3 or 4 years, which means helpful to patients directly, and not just doing basic science. Science for the sake of science is really great, but science that is directly impacting people and revolutionizing things and doing a 10x improvement on the status quo, That's so much better, and that's the ARPA-H model. So I'm really excited about the prospect that we would be able to get some long COVID and ME funding through ARPA-H.
Thank you. Yeah. And one final question. Don't have a whole lot of time, but I think it's very important. You've kind of already touched on it. But what inspires your hope that MECFS will be solved? Dr. Wolf?
I think for me, it's, again, COVID is an awful disease, and so is long COVID, but I do think that it is happening at such a high prevalence in the population that it cannot be ignored, and the funding that goes through for long COVID will help us understand MECFS much better. Again, just a substantial proportion of my patients with long COVID have MECFS, and I'm hoping we learn not only who is getting MECFS, but what are the risk factors, what are the pathological drivers of the disease, because that will really help us better understand the treatments and really will advance the science in MECFS. I think there's a lot of hope there, and that's what I would like to see come out of this. And I think we're turning the corner on this as we're kind of moving away from only looking at long COVID and starting to look at infection-associated chronic illnesses and having Congress's support on that.
In a similar idea that it's really the power of the patient voice that's gives me the most inspiration, and seeing how thousands of patients can call their members of Congress and get these really important ideas talked about with a great measure of seriousness. So where I see hope is actually in democracy. We live in a time when people are probably more cynical about democracy than they've ever been in their lifetime. But what has made me what sends shivers up my spine in the best way is seeing this citizen action right in front of me, that people are doing exactly the kind of thing that is talked about in your 9th grade civics textbook, of engaging in the process and the process is working. And this Senate hearing a few months ago was an incredible display of bipartisanship, that people who on the right and on the left all have close loved ones who have MECFS, who are disabled by it, and who have been to dozens of doctors and who haven't been able to find a treatment. So if there's one thing that I'm probably most confident about is in the power of universality, the power of all of us tapping into the human experience and to the meaning and purpose of suffering, and then applying that to the policy process. And patients are turning pain into purpose and turning purpose into power. And I've never felt more excited about this at any point in the last decade as I do today.
Thank you so much for those answers and for your message of hope. We really appreciate it. And now we'll hear from Erin Lee.
So this week is CFS Awareness Week. Across the United States, we're holding educational events to help healthcare providers teach ME and treat ME. Around the world, we will see buildings and signs light up for CFS, and thank you to the CDC for being part of that this week. We will see protests, parliamentary debates, research conferences, and even a global tea party that will raise funds for to solve CFS. Most of these events are led by people living with MECFS. They are the millions missing. Millions of people missing from their lives, from their communities, their places of worship, their vocations. Almost all of them will experience a post-exertional malaise crash over the coming weeks as a result of their efforts. Some won't ever recover. Many will be back next year to do it all again. Why? Well, as Wilhelmina said, as long as people are doing the work, there is hope. Yes, we are suffering. Yes, we need change. Yes, our allies and funds are currently too few, but we also have a hunger for life. We have lost our lives without ever dying. We know how precious life is. We yearn to write and run and build and create and hold our loved ones close and go to the rescue in a million worthy causes. We want loud music, bursting flavor, adventure, failure, and growth. The human experience is dazzling. We refuse to give up hope because we want so badly to be a part of it. Under each of your chairs is an electric candle. I invite you all to pull them out and twist the bottom to turn them on. And thank you for dimming the lights. We light these candles in honor of those we've lost. We love and miss them. We light these candles in honor of those with the severest form of the disease whose families are currently fighting for access to tube feeding. We won't stop fighting for you. And finally, we light these candles as an expression of our hope. This disease is solvable. There is enough money in this world to solve it. There are enough brilliant people in this world to solve it. We have decades of research that can guide us away from old harmful theories and toward tantalizing theories that have yet to be fully explored. And crucially, we have each other. We have our zest for life, our unique talents, and our relentless commitment to help ease suffering. We will keep doing the work until our hope becomes reality. Please join me in 2 minutes of silence as we watch acts of hope and activism from people with MECFS. As you watch, I urge you to consider how you can turn hope into action and help us solve this disease once and for all. Thank you.
Wilhelmina, and to Ryan and Dr. Walker, to everyone who spoke tonight, the MEAction support group in the community, everyone that helped plan this. There's just a lot of reason for hope and optimism. I think someone said on the panel, it's never had more reason to be hopeful than right now. As we conclude tonight's service awards, we want to acknowledge everyone watching on the live stream. Many are too sick to attend in person, but many who actually helped plan this event. We see you and we're glad that you're with us. We want to thank the CDC for their support and the Marriott for their compassion while working with the planning team comprised entirely of people with MECFS, putting on their first event possibly ever. And of course, we want to thank Ryan Pryor and Dr. Tiffany Walker again for all their contributions to the MECFS community and for the hope they give us. A round of applause. Wilhelmina Jenkins, we want to show our support and love for you as well. Thank you. I believe you're online. And finally, thanks to everyone joining us tonight. And if you'd like to help the MECFS community, here are a few things you can do. And Ryan mentioned this, reach out to your representative, let them know solving MECFS is important, and that we need a home at the NIH dedicated to solving infection-associated chronic illnesses like MECFS, long COVID, and others. If you work in public health or healthcare, become a champion for improving MECFS education. Share the Mayo Clinic CME on MECFS or share MEAction's flashcard deck in non-King. If you work in journalism, dive deep into the history of MECFS and tell their stories. Let people know that this is a problem worth solving. Thank you again for coming out, and we hope you have a great evening. And, oh, Jess.
We want to say when we meet.
Oh, yes.
There's a lot of new faces in here, so if there's anyone here who has MECFS and isn't part of MEAction Georgia, or you want to be an ally and do advocacy work with us, MEAction Georgia meets, our support group meets on the first Thursday, other way around. Our advocacy group meets on the first Thursday of the month, and our support group meets on the third Thursday of the month. We usually take a break in the summer, but we'll be back in the fall. Did I get it all?
1 o'clock.
1 p.m. on Thursdays. Eastern time. Yes, thank you. We also have a Facebook group. We're active on Twitter and on Instagram, so you can find us all those places, or just come talk to us afterwards, and we'll help you get connected.
Yes, thanks for that reminder. Thanks for coming, and if you'd like to pick up a copy of Ryan Pryor's book, The Long Haul, he'll be at the back signing copies. All right. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.